One of the best ways to get better at art quick is to paint small things big. Let's get into it. Here's a perfect example of what I mean. Blueberries, they're tiny. And I've got a small piece of paper, but on that paper, I'm going to paint them big, way bigger, like 500% bigger than they actually are in real life. Getting into the painting here with my 1/2-inch dagger and using the tip, I'm going to sketch out the basic round shape. But friends, stick around because I'm going to let you know the top 3 reasons why painting small things big on small paper is going to make you better at art fast. My palette is sprayed down, of course, and I'm going in after sketching in that basic circle with the tip of my brush and mapping out where the little ruffle or crown of the blueberry is. At this stage, I'm thinking really dark darks, really light lights. If I'm seeing a really light area, I kind of staying away from that with paint, or at least applying the paint really lightly. And then the dark areas, I'm going in right away and really hitting it hard with the dark pigment. Okay, reason number 1, painting small things big on small paper is really helpful is this. Did you ever notice, I don't know if you're like me, but I kind of had a thing for expensive purses and whatnot over the years. And the wallets, the teeny tiny wallets, are sometimes just as expensive as the big bag. And it's because, bottom line, when you have less space to work something out, work in, everything is harder and takes longer. So exploring a subject like blueberries, but doing so much, much bigger than they are in real life, gives you a lot of room to move, be creative, and comfortable. Back to the painting, I've been adding in some of those strong blues, some light lavenders, and even a touch of red just to be crazy and intensify those darker areas in a unique way. Going back in with my 1/2-inch dagger into that second blueberry, really, really rough sketch. Rinse that brush, grab some lavender, and create the crown. It's basically like a really wonky, out of shape star. Then, without rinsing the brush, pull some of that dark color from around the edge of your blueberry towards the center. Adding a little bit of a cobalt turquoise, again, just because it's fun in an interesting way to keep things fun and interesting. Wow, I need some new adjectives apparently. When everything's wet, you have the opportunity to refine the shape of your item that much easier, like I'm doing there. It gets a little harder, not impossible, but much more difficult to refine the shape when things have completely dried. I like that cobalt turquoise, so I rinsed my brush and I'm going to go ahead and sketch using just that color now. Notice where I'm holding my brush pretty much this entire time. It's not quite in the middle of the handle, but almost. And so it's allowing me to feel very free. It's allowing my arm to be really loose and control the movement. But at the same time, if you're a beginner, this handhold at almost the center of the brush handle might feel a little out of control. So feel free to grip that handle further down. Headed back into the second blueberry with a juicy on damp technique. And if you're wondering what in the heck juicy on damp is, I'm going to link a video below. It's an important one. And I'm even going back to the first blueberry where things are much more dry and adding in some of that really, really dark blue. Now, I don't want you hopping over to that video quite yet. So juicy on damp is basically a whole lot of color, mostly pigment, not a lot of water, applied to a damp paper. Okay, reason number 2 that painting small things really large on small paper is beneficial. I love the technique of using your brush in a directional way. I just did a little bit of that recently on that first blueberry, where I'm not just applying a stroke, but I'm applying a stroke in a very specific direction or in a very specific shape to indicate dimension on an item. And let me tell you what, if you were trying to paint these blueberries in the actual size that they are in real life, you would not be able to do that. So you're going to learn a lot more about directional brushstrokes and creating depth as a beginner when you work larger. Moving on to that third blueberry, I've added another layer of a green. And friends, use what you have, use what you love. Don't worry about the exact colors that I'm using. Doing a little bit of contrast detailing, which is adding a dark color on the edge of this blueberry and working it out into the damp areas of the paper. Now, I was messing around with adding a center on that third blueberry with a yellow green, and I didn't like it, so I just turned it into a watercolor wash over the whole berry, and I'm a lot happier with it, but I am going to let it dry so that I can do some detail next. Now, you might be wondering, am I looking back at my blueberries, my in real life blueberries, often to figure out where to put these brush strokes and where to not? And the answer is not so much, and not as much as you would think. Again, going back to what I said initially, I'm looking for super dark darks and super light lights. And everything in between on my page, I'm kind of making up. I'm doing what I want to do and what feels right. Now, these leaves feel so right, and it's a press, drag, and slightly slower lift so I can get that nice point on the edge. And I'm letting my brush run out here on the left-hand side, and I love it. And even picked up a little bit of that dark blue on my brush by accident, but it's a happy, happy accident. I don't know about you, but when it comes to painting blueberries, I feel like these crowns or the centers of them are so important. They're kind of the spot where a blueberry becomes a blueberry in my eyes. So I take a lot of care to really spend time and attention on those areas. I'm getting to that point where I really feel like I'm going to need to let these three bad boys dry before I can move on to the final layer of details. And let what's going on the page right now be a reminder that the stroke that you add now isn't final and doesn't have to be. You don't have to be in love with every stroke you put down. There's always a way out of every moment that just feels ugh on your page. That's it. Bring in the Opera Rose. Opera Rose makes everything better, and I've decided that there's no reason all of these blueberries need to be front facing. So I'm gonna make this one a side facing view, and oh yeah, that's what it needed. I'm much happier now. Now I'm gonna step away and let this layer dry for a few minutes, and we'll be back with the final layer of details and, of course, the final reason that painting small things big on small paper is so important. I'm back and everything's dried for about 45 minutes now, and I want to head in with some simple but impactful details. I've got my number 2 round brush, and I'm going to make these little points around the center of that blueberry that kind of epitomize that little crown on the blueberry. So yeah, they're like little points of a crown. And I'm using my darkest blue, and then I went in with a little bit of that creamy yellow from my palette and didn't like it too much, so spread it out a bit. Adding a few little highlights with a lot of paint on my brush. I'm almost using the watercolor pigment that's in the pans like gouache, and then with a clean brush washing it out and letting it blendy blend. And I'm doing that here again over on the left hand side with a bright kind of cobalt-ish blue. I love mixed media, and so I'm often bringing in whites, and very rarely do I use white watercolor, but if that's what you have and you want to add some highlights like I'm about to, then by all means go for it. I also would recommend a gouache. I love using gesso. I have a video below that was really controversial about using gesso. Or you can also use bleed proof white, which is basically a gouache. How are we feeling, friends? Do you feel like you're ready to give this video a boop? That's a like, and if you are, I appreciate it so much because your like helps others find this channel. You've waited long enough. Reason number 3 that painting small things really big on small paper is going to help you propel your artwork quality fast. Here's the thing, friends. I think you could have guessed it. The smaller you try to paint something, the more challenging it is. And the last thing that any beginner needs, or even someone who's just coming back to this art experience, the last thing you need is more challenges. I want you to focus on color choice. I want you to focus on drama and getting that kind of shape right. But I don't want you to have to focus on all those things all at once being harder just because you're working in a smaller space. Okay, if you're with me and you agree, can I get a heck yeah in comments, friends? And here's a little side note to reason number 3, and it's an important one. You might be thinking, well, gosh, why don't I just paint really big fruit on really big paper and I'll have tons of room to move around in. Won't that be better? Listen, if you feel that urge, go for it. Give it a whirl. But I'll be honest, this painting small items really big on small paper, those 3 elements are really important together because it gives you a very manageable proportion all the way around. When you get bigger, there are different challenges that are going to come at you from all directions, in a similar way to when you paint really small things smaller. So it's really about that sweet spot as a beginner, to give yourself a level playing field so you can focus on the fun stuff while building your skills in a more, shall I say, controlled environment. Okay, enough of all that. Let's get back to the painting. I am adding some of my signature long, graceful, linear detail moments into these leaves. I am holding my liner brush about 1/3 of the way up the handle. Actually, it's more almost halfway up, but you see what I'm talking about. I want control, but I also want to stay loose. And the further down on the brush that I hold, the more rigid I get. Now, while I was waxing poetic about reason number 3 and yada yada yada, I was bouncing around the page using my number 2 brush, adding little specks and dashes and lines to just bring out some personality in the blueberries. At this stage of the painting, you're not reinventing the wheel. At this stage in the painting, you have your washes, your highs and your lows, your lights and your darks all mapped out, and you're just adding some detail moments that really give everything a little zing. And while you don't necessarily want to reinvent the wheel at this point, making some bigger changes like that green center I just added to that top blueberry is definitely worthwhile if you're up for a little risky behavior at this point in the painting. I mean, what's the worst could happen? You don't like the green, you lift it out. And friends, if you're wondering what lifting is, I have a video I'm linking below so you can learn all about the basics of beginner watercolor. Next, we need to dive deeper into how to create shadows when you're painting fruit, and this video is really going to make that all the much more clearer for you. And until next time, friends, you know what I'm going to say. Happy painting.